want you to think about for a moment this morning, what does it mean to have integrity? What does it mean to you to have integrity? I saw a lot of great quotes about it this week when I was doing research. C.S. Lewis once said that integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Another quote said that integrity is not something that you show other people, it's what you do behind their backs. Naval Ravikant said that integrity is when what you think and what you say and what you do are all the same thing. Think about that. When what you think and what you say and what you do are all the same thing, you have integrity. It's this idea that you are not one person in private and another person in public. I find it interesting because one of the labels that often gets thrown at the church, not really a label, an accusation that gets thrown at the church as a whole, is the word hypocrite. We're often called hypocrites because we say one thing and do something else. In other words, we are being called out in those instances for having a lack of integrity. The church often makes a big deal about loving Jesus and then doesn't always act like him. I remember going to a Women of Faith event with my mom years ago when I was first starting out in ministry. And we went to, I think it was one of the big sports stadiums in Orlando. And there were thousands of women in this stadium, right? And they were all here for this weekend of singing about God and learning how to love God more and praising God. And there was a beautiful spirit of worship when we were in the room. And then we went out to the parking lot afterwards. And you're laughing because you know what's happening, right? What was happening in the room did not translate to how we behaved in the parking lot when thousands of women were all trying to exit the parking lot through the one or two exits at the same time. It was every woman for herself. And people were rude and mean. And it didn't translate what we said and what we did. This week we're concluding our series on Ted Lasso. And we're actually skipping into season 2, episode 3. And we see one of the characters going through this moral dilemma and wrestling with how to have integrity. The team's been working on getting players more endorsement deals, and Sam Obasanya from Nigeria has been given a contract for Dubai Air. He does the photo shoot, and he proudly texts the pictures from the photo shoot home to his father in Nigeria, excited that this means that Sam will now be able to get tickets and bring his parents over to see him play in England. But instead of being happy, Sam's dad sends a text back saying, "Did you know that Dubai Air is owned by Cerithium Oil?" And then he sends a text with a link to an article about how that oil company is refusing to clean up its latest oil spill in the Niger Delta in Sam's homeland. But it's the last text that his dad sends that really breaks his heart. To see you choose to be a shill for a corporation that has ruined the lives of so many breaks my heart, is what Sam's dad says. And so now all of the excitement of this endorsement deal has gone, and Sam makes his way to the office to try and figure out if there's any way he can get out of this deal with Dubai Air. He just can't be the face of one of the subsidiaries of this oil company now that he knows. Dubai Air is the main sponsor for AFC Richmond, the team that Sam plays for. Their name is on every jersey and everywhere, but management understands what Sam is going through, and they assure him they will work to get him out of this contract. The owner, Rebecca, calls the CEO of Cerithium Oil, who's an old family friend, and he says, sure, he'll let Sam out of his contract if Rebecca fires him and moves him off the team. Rebecca's goddaughter, Nora, is shadowing her at work and overhears all of this. And she tells Rebecca, sometimes you have to do the right thing even if you lose. So let's take a look at what happens in the locker room as Sam is getting ready to go out and play the match in this. That's Jamie Tart at the end there, one of the star players who had played for AFC Richmond, got traded away, now in season 2 is back. And they're a little suspicious of him. He hasn't always been a nice guy, definitely hasn't been a team player. We're on the same team. We have to wear the same kit, the same uniform, is what he says. Sam is doing the right thing, and his teammates are joining him in it. Later, Coach Lasso will say, doing the right thing is never the wrong thing. There's a few other times I've heard similar quotes. Mark Twain once said, it's never wrong to do the right thing. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, the time is always right to do right. That came from a commencement speech that he gave at Oberlin College in 1965. And I went back and I read through the whole address recently, and his words are still hauntingly relevant. Somewhere we must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals. Without this hard work, time becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. So we must help time and realize that the time is always right to do right. Left on its own, society stagnates. It needs a push. It needs reminders. It needs people who will stand up and who will do what is right. So what is the right thing to do? We're here today in worship and online and in person, trying to learn more about God and develop in our relationship with Him and learn how to love God and love neighbors. So what are we supposed to do? Here's where our scripture lessons come in this morning. Let's start with Micah. He's told you, O mortal, what is good and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. When you read the rest of the chapter, you see that the prophet Micah is sharing a sort of vision, imagining a conversation between the people of Israel and the Lord. And in verses 1 through 5, the Lord introduces his case against the disobedient people of Israel. And verses 6 and 7 record Israel's response as a series of questions, beginning with what should I come to the Lord? Regular burnt offerings? Really large, numerous burnt offerings and gallons of oil? And here we go for hyperbole. Maybe our firstborn children will be enough. And God's answer is, you know what to do. I've already told you. Love justice, do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with me. And in the New Testament, Paul is writing to the church in Galatia. Let us not grow weary in doing what is right, for we will reap at harvest time if we do not give up. So then whenever we have an opportunity, let us work for the good of all, and especially for those in the family of faith. Paul had already spent a whole lot of time in this letter warning the people in the church about the things that they ought to stay away from. A huge list of do nots. And it seems like he realizes that they might be a little bit overwhelmed and need some encouragement here. Don't give up. Don't get tired of doing good. Because while you might not get to see the harvest, you are planting seeds for somebody else to harvest. And as much as we are able, we ought to do good for everybody and those in the family of God. It sounds an awful lot like John Wesley. Do all the good you can in all the ways you can in all the places that you can as long as you ever can. Doing what is right is not always easy. We can be honest about that. It doesn't always get noticed. It doesn't always get rewarded. Sometimes, in fact, it gets punished when it makes other people upset and uncomfortable. But is it worth it? That is the question that you and I have to answer for ourselves. For Sam, in the episode it was, to be able to look at himself in the mirror and like the person that he saw in the reflection. He needed to do something different and take a stand. Let's watch another clip from this episode and see how things turn out for Sam and for the rest of the team. Do this to me. You may never get asked to prove your integrity on a world stage like Sam did, to have to answer questions about your behavior in a press conference on TV. But there are 1,000 little opportunities that we all have on a daily basis to demonstrate our integrity. It's the way you treat people who work retail in a store. It's the way you speak to your spouse and your children and your grandchildren. It's the things you say about people when they're not around you to hear them. It's what you do when someone around you tells a joke that you know crosses the line, and you are left with the choice inside of you to speak up and say something, or to let it go in the interests of getting along. And a whole bunch more. They may not seem like big things, but 1,000 little things are what create the habits that show up in those big things. And all of it counts. Doing the right thing is never the wrong thing. So may we have the courage to do what's right just because it's right. For us as believers, the right thing is simple, even if it's not easy. Do justice, love kindness, and walk in humility. And the job of each of us inside of this community is to help support one another in that pursuit so that we don't grow weary and give up.